So, good afternoon to everyone here in person and to the 40 or more people who have already joined online. So it's my great pleasure to resume our faculty research seminar, which has been on hiatus because of the pandemic. And it's so nice to see people in person. This term, we're really focusing on our new faculty members. We've done a lot of hiring in the faculty in the last 2 years, and we've got incredible new folks. So we're featuring 4 of those this term, as well as 1 external speaker. And then we've got more to come in future seminar series. So with that, I'm going to pass the mic over to Nicholas Coops, who will be introducing Melissa, today's speaker, Dr. Melissa McHale.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us, and thank you for joining us online. As Sally said, this is an important day. It's an important day that the pandemic is behind us, and we are actually starting to meet again and have scientific discourse and discussion at a university where it belongs and where we should. So thank you to those that have come in today, and thanks to those joining us from hopefully all across the province and country. So with that, it's a great pleasure to introduce to you Associate Professor Melissa McHale. As Sally said, Melissa is one of our new hires. She only started at UBC in September of 2021. So she's only been here 4 months. Enormously grateful she's stepped up and been willing to be our first presenter today. Melissa is an urban ecologist who specializes in urban theory and practical science for decision-making in cities. Her research is diverse. She covers socio and biophysical drivers of urban ecosystem structure and function. She can work at a global scale and thinks about global urbanization processes, green structure, ecosystem services and trade-offs, and linkages between urban systems and landscape pattern. Before Melissa came here, she was an associate professor at Colorado State University, and prior to that, North Carolina State University. She got her master's from Rutgers University and a PhD from Colorado State. So with that, Melissa, I'm grateful that you've stepped up to be our first speaker in the series. Very much looking forward to hearing about both your research and what you're going to be doing while you're here at UBC. So thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you, Nicholas, for that introduction. I'm assuming everyone virtually can hear me. I am so honored to be here. I should just say that first. I've been delighted at all the people I've been able to meet so far and how amazing the welcoming vibe I get from the Faculty of Forestry. Like, Vancouver's okay as a place to live, right? But Faculty of Forestry has been an amazing landing place. So thank you all for being so generous and supportive as we've moved countries during a pandemic, which isn't the easiest. So the title of this talk today, From South to North, might be referring to the fact that most of us come from the south to the north to get to the great country of Canada. It could refer to the fact that I'm likely to start talking about the work that I do in the global south and move northward in my presentation. It might refer to the fact that I never like to go from north to south, and I fight tradition in every way possible. So I just have to put south first because we always put north first, giving you a little insight into my remarkable personality. And then it could also refer to the fact that I was taking a complete temper tantrum and having a panic attack when I was asked to come up with a title. And so my husband wrote one down while I was in the shower that was delightfully vague. But I couldn't let him get away with having all the answers, so I had to switch the north and the south at the very least. And maybe all those things. I'll let you figure it out. Nonetheless, it took me this vague topic. I needed it because I just needed time to seriously contemplate what to talk to you about today. Nobody wants to do their job talk when they've already been here, right? And I decided at the very last minute, they don't call me last minute Melissa for no reason. that I would give you some insight into what's going on in my mind. Now, I'd like you to believe that my mind is as calm as this image right here, and this is how ideas float through my brain. You might recognize as I go through this presentation, it's a bit stormier and darker in this brain, but I'm here and I'm going out on a limb to just share some ideas on what I've been thinking about since I've arrived in Vancouver. This isn't going. There we go. So this was my last slide for my job talk, the very last one. So the first thing I thought when I pulled this up to remind myself what I did when I was interviewing and going through this long process of interviewing and figuring out if we're coming here and negotiating all online. I looked at this image and thought, these set of images and thought, did I really put that pixelated and unclear image in my slide base? Oh my God, that's embarrassing. So I got over the embarrassment and I thought, no, really, this slide brings to me a whole series of emotions, kind of like when you show up, when you get like those pictures on your iPhone nowadays that tell you like about a birthday 5 years ago, and you see that image and all of a sudden you're back in that place, like living and breathing. And what I remembered when I looked at this slide was like spending so much time in these images. I was like in Google Images constantly. What is it like to be in Vancouver? How am I going to create a vision for a place that I've never been? So what I did was I took the little Google guy and I spent an extraordinary amount of time taking the little Google guy in Google Maps and putting him in different places around the city and walking him. You know, it's Kitsilano Pool, we'll walk through UBC campus. It wasn't quite effective. So being here in person is a very different experience, and it's wonderful. But you know, you got to imagine that I was coming from a very distant point of view, and now that I've jumped into this space, it's amazing to me how much this place really has to offer, both for living and working. Now, I went, when I developed my presentation, I was trying to develop a vision. I thought about 6 main themes. And I came up with these themes. I'd like you to think, at least when I was giving the presentation, is I came up with these themes to show you how a long-term social ecological research center should be run. But I'm going to admit to you now that actually these 6 themes were just a way that I could throw as much information as you as possible and hope you liked something I was doing. And the thing is, I'm an urban ecologist, and I'm typically the only urban ecologist at a university. So I'm asked to do lots and lots of things. I tend to be a jack of all trades. And so I threw a lot at the crowd. So I've decided today I'm going to step back a bit, and I'm going to pick 3 of those things, 3, and dive into them more, but less from the perspective of what I want to show you that I've done. You're all quite capable of looking up Google Scholar and reading my abstracts, right? So instead of repeating to you my results and my methods, I decided to frame these themes according to what I've been thinking about now that I've been here. Hoping that maybe you'll see some ideas in there and be like, hey, maybe I'm going to buy Melissa coffee and we have something to discuss. I'm just kidding. Really, I like beer. Okay. It's a Colorado thing. So where do we need to go? This roadmap is these themes based on what I've been thinking about, maybe where we need to go in the fields of urban ecology and the contributions we can make from UBC. I've been talking for 3 hours straight before this presentation, so I'm slightly thirsty. You might have to give me a few drinking breaks. So I put these themes in context of sentences, right? So the Global South has a lot to contribute to our understanding of urban ecosystems, one idea. So yes, starting in the Global South. Urban ecology is a field based on relationships, and we need more empirical analyses to advance the field. And in order to create sustainable cities, we need research that is driven specifically by managers, planners, and policymakers. And in each of these contexts, I'm going to describe something about Canada. Oh, Canada, right? Do you guys get sensitive about that? I heard you do, so I just figured I would take the knife and like, my son's been coming home singing Oh, Canada. It's kind of fun. So the Global South And I think Canada has a lot to contribute to our understanding of urban ecosystems. I think that there is a real place for empirical analyses in Canada that will help us understand urban ecosystems and how they function. And there is so much opportunity for this place where we have these partnerships and create sustainable relationships in Canada, mostly Vancouver and UBC is what I'm gonna talk about. So I'm just gonna take one step back. For those of you who don't know who I am, this is the Faculty of Forestry, and I'm not sure how many people realize that I am an urban ecologist. And this urban ecology field is relatively new, and that urban ecology as a field has evolved as I've also evolved my science and what I do. And so in the very beginning, I always talk about how when we were first doing ecology, we were doing it in cities. So essentially studying a tree in the city, studying a bird species in a city, and then comparing it to outside the city. That's called ecology in cities. But over time, we became more interdisciplinary and thought about cities as ecosystems and began to think a lot more about people in those ecosystems and the feedbacks between people and nature. So there we became into socio-ecological and more interdisciplinary. And now there's a lot of talk about what's ecology for cities, right? And that is we're doing our science to actually get to this place where we can achieve sustainability in some way or resilience in some way. My lab tends to, I would use the simple framework to describe what we do. By the way, this framework is one that I've criticized quite often in the literature, but I still use it. Like, isn't that what scientists are all about? Say that's wrong, but use it anyway. So nonetheless, this is how I think about the ecosystem if I'm really simplifying it. We have structure. Structure impacts function, which means that we get different ecosystem services, and they impact people in a way that change our decision-making and our behaviors and come back and influence structure. And so I have these questions that I tend to ask. What does land use and land cover really tell us about ecosystem function and the provisioning of ecosystem services? How does the provisioning of ecosystem services affect people's health and well-being and potentially change behavior? And how do changing human behaviors and human decision-making feedback and influence ecosystem structure and function? So a nice loop there. So where do we need to go? Back to our roadmap. I'm going to start in the global south. You know, I've been obsessed with Africa for a very long time, but as an urban ecologist, the continent is so interesting because that is what we think of as one of the last frontiers for urbanization. So one of the things I like to talk about is a quote in the literature about how there's going to be more people living in cities in Africa than there are people living around the world in cities today, right? Like that's an immense amount of growth. And so really need to think about Africa in a different light. This is where I work on the ground most of the time. The Greater Kruger Park National Park Social Ecological System. You can see in the context of Southern Africa where it is, it's this weird long shape that I like to say is as big as New Jersey. That's where I grew up, if you weren't able to notice. And so Kruger National Park is this conservation area, and then urbanization that's happening along the border that's really impacting conservation. Is everything okay? I can't hear. Oh. I'll keep talking while she's being technical. So this place is really interesting to us because, well, interesting to the world, because of course there's this large conservation area where there's a lot of animals that get a lot of attention, like elephants and lions and leopards. But also because there's extreme poverty in this region. And in the past, people were forcibly removed from where they were in cities and put in homelands on the border of Kruger National Park. And now urbanization is happening there. And so this legacy of apartheid continues in the realm of conservation. Is everything okay? Okay. We have worked on some theoretical papers on why urban ecosystem science in particular needs to think about what's happening in Africa. And we've suggested that urbanization is happening different there. That we like to take the global north ideas and what's happened up here and apply it to the south. And we don't think that's fair or just or equitable, or it's quite colonial, yeah? And so what if we switch that around, right? What is it that we need to look at in terms of urbanization in the global south? And what is it we need to learn and put in the context of our work? And so that's what we framed in this paper, in which we just discussed how urbanization is happening, and you can see what looks like cities from above, but when you get on the ground, there's still these places supported strongly by rural livelihoods, and what that means for urban ecosystems and its development. And we thought about different ways in which we can use Africa to give us ideas for models of resilience and sustainability we might not have thought about before. So there's some places where Africa can jump ahead of us. They don't have the infrastructure that we have. And that sometimes that infrastructure is a limitation, right? And so if we think about how they've jumped into using cell phones and how everyone in South Africa has like 5 cell phones, and that how they've mobilized that immense cell phone network using using an app called WhatsApp to communicate, and can now monitor stream networks going through cities as they enter into the Kruger National Park. Now that's brilliant, an amazing thing that we can think about in terms of citizen science or incorporating society into our science. That's actually happening on the ground there already. One of the other things that we noticed is that some of our concepts like ecosystem services that were first framed to communicate the value of nature and its benefits, as it becomes implemented in some of these areas, there is injustices that continue in that implementation process. So for example, first I just want to like place you in the context. Sometimes seeing a picture is worth 1,000 words. This is what we're thinking about. This is downtown Aitken. This is on a very quiet morning. Usually you can't actually get a car through because there's so many people and animals in this space. But this is what we would call a city center in this region. And here are some of the more suburban rural areas where people live in that area. So here's the municipality. It's a weird shape and it nudges itself right into the belly of the Kruger National Park. And people, of course, are thinking about decision-making and land use change with urbanization in this region for preserving biodiversity. So one of the national organizations came in and made a map on where biodiversity is, where we need to think about biodiversity. And what I thought was really peculiar about this map was every place where there were people, there was no biodiversity. And every place where that was already protected and managed, that area has a plethora of biodiversity. And I started to wonder if they actually collected data, or did they just take a land use map and say, this is where the biodiversity is? I think it's the latter, right? So that map, and then one like this, which is also a really awful map, but I didn't make it so I can show it to you and be okay with it, is a map that suggests that different areas, that the places that are built up and degraded and have people are not providing ecosystem services. And the places that are natural are providing ecosystem services. Again, these are assumptions without measurements, right? And ecosystem services as a concept is like so human-centric that it blows my mind that there's no ecosystem services where people live, right? It's hard for me to imagine this. So we started going into these communities and asking people about ecosystem services they value and mapping them out. I'm not going to go into the details. We found that 80% of the services that they found were associated with trees, and that a lot of the services that they were talking about, that they valued, were on their own residential parcels, the landscapes in which they lived. Yet whenever people study what humans are doing to the landscape in this area, it's always about the communal areas, where people go just to harvest wood, right? So there's different landscapes that people use for different reasons. And in the studies, people choose certain landscapes to show certain things. And we also started to try to get at the heterogeneity of this landscape. So we used our land cover modeling to step away from this is a different land use and look at the real land covers as they are existing in that community. And so you go from this red blob, this is where people live framework to, wow, there is a lot of open space and vegetation, right? Like even just looking at the map a different way changes your perception on what's happening in this area. It's green, not red. Red is a bad color, right? Everyone always says red is bad. We'll talk about red blob urbanization in a minute. So the story in this region, and by some of my colleagues, my respected colleagues and some of my friends, tends to be that humans and elephants are tree killers and biodiversity thieves. And a lot of their research is set up to actually show this point. But and then they're looking in communal areas. So what we're trying to show is that your story actually affects your question, which affects your methods, which affects your results. And we have to change our story. The other thing that, so this work has been also the basis for a NASA grant we've recently received, where we're looking at the last urban frontier and really looking at not just South Africa, but Ethiopia and Nigeria, and trying to identify hotspots of change and what that means for the provisioning of ecosystem services to that country. That's been a lot of fun and difficult. It's a challenging yet rewarding project because we're helping NASA think more about how to approach work in Africa, which so far they've struggled to do. So that's been excellent. And I actually came up with the title to that proposal and we debated it for a while, but I like to make things like bright and showy and get people thinking, is it really the last urban frontier? Because what I'd like to say, so this is the point where I moved to Canada for this section, right? I think that there's a lot of urban frontiers in Canada. But here we are with that red blob urbanization again, that map showing the evil people encroaching onto the wildlands. And I'd just like to say that maybe we need to change this perspective a bit. And we need to be honest where we're going to need space for people, where we're going to need services for people. And if we do that first, perhaps we'll do better at preserving open spaces and those other places. Just perhaps, something to think about. And also what I notice as I look at this space, like even at a higher resolution, is that this is, I don't know if I'm saying it right yet, and I say it all the time, Coquitlam or Coquitlam. See, David Bunn, he told me I was saying it wrong. Okay, so anyway, he's in the audience, I know he's listening. So this urbanization that I'm watching there as I'm working in the capstone with students and looking at images, whoa, what this idea brings to me is, I thought Canada had all the answers. You guys might not be beyond making the United States mistakes over again. And we've got some work to do in some of these areas encroaching into the mountains, right? I'm sure you know that. And where I'm going with that is living and being in this space, right? So I live in Westbrook on campus right now, which was, this is a big change for us. We lived in a 4,000 square foot house in Colorado, okay? Big garage, all kinds of gear. It was a gearage, not a garage, right? And now I get here and I don't know what to do with my paddleboard. I'm in a 1,000 square foot apartment with my family. I can hear them chewing no matter where I am in the apartment, which is a problem for me. But I've experienced some new and amazing things about how the design of this place is really influencing people's happiness and health and well-being. And it's made me want to think more about how we measure those things and get people past what they've been told. So in the United States, they've been told the suburbs is your dream, okay? But why, if that's the truth, why is everyone I meet in the suburbs so goddamn miserable? And why aren't people like having their wedding pictures on a suburban street, right? Nobody does this. This is offensive, right? So nonetheless, right? So I'm thinking about what this place and how we can measure and study it can help the rest of the world think through in terms of how we actually provide cities that provide and maximize the services to people, make ecosystems with integrity, and also just create a lifestyle of like, happiness. I like this. There's these new happiness labs popping up around the world. And I think that's great. I think I'm going to start studying happiness. I won't. I'll let the happiness experts do that. But I'll read all the time about happiness in the suburbs, because you know what? There are no articles about happiness in the suburbs. It's always about misery in the suburbs. Okay, enough of that tangent. I had more things to say, but I'm going to take a moment. Get off that. Because this is more serious, right? So I've done a lot of work in South Africa and spent a lot of time there, and I've always been so enamored by the progress and the thought process for reconciliation in South Africa. And I am really excited and honored that I get the chance to learn about what's happening here in Canada. I think, no offense to my South African friends, I think that they have a lot of idealism that can't get implemented. And yet I'm seeing a lot implemented on the ground here at many different scales, from national down to local. And so this is actually where I think that there's a lot of space to write and learn for the rest of the world, and some comparisons that might be really important between places like South Africa and Canada in terms of urbanization and equity. And more simpler, I think we are starting conversations on what a field school, a UBC school, would look like on the ground in South Africa, looking at some of these ideas for both undergraduates and graduate students. So we can grab a beer and talk about that. Where do we need to go now in terms of this next moment? Urban ecology is a field based on relationships, and we need more empirical analyses. Yeah, what does that mean? Relationships can mean a lot of things. It can mean correlations. Does mean I am referring to that. I'm also referring to the fact that we always want to compare cities, and yet we haven't come up with the frameworks for comparing cities. And urban ecology as a field has one grand theory. Is that yay for us, right? Yay. We have one, and it's called urban ecosystem convergence. And so what we talk about is cities are homogenizing, which basically means that cities are becoming more like one another over time than their surrounding landscapes. This is the basis behind the idea, and we use it just as a founding theoretical framework in a lot of our comparisons. We're still struggling on the methods for comparing cities and not comparing apples to oranges, but hey, we've got a theoretical framework, right? So yay us. Now I've used this, and I think it's a fun one. It's a fun one to look at to see where we deviate and what that means for landscape management. And we can use this in terms of although the work associated with this tends to be about correlations and relationships, right? So what are the drivers of tree cover? So we throw in lots of things into a model, and we're like, some people are arguing it's socioeconomic status. It's the luxury effect. Some people are arguing, well, it's not just the luxury effect, it's how you spend your money. Some people are like, no, it's really about how the city was planned, and things like redlining screwed us from the start, right? And so there are all these different things out there that we're talking about. And so it's a great framework to compare some of these relationships and think about some of these drivers and how, whether or not they're present in certain landscapes or not. And the one that's really trendy right now is this redlining one, right? You see it, at least in the United States, it's almost in every newspaper all the time. How does redlining in US history impact how much tree canopy there is and ecosystem services or disservices like urban heat? Well, they're beating the story to death, folks, literally, right? Redlining, you want to ask a question.
What's redlining?
Oh, really? Oh, Canada, you had redlining. We'll get to that in a minute. Oh my God, I love this. This is so much fun. All right, so redlining in the US happens when they didn't want to give loans to certain people so that they couldn't live in those neighborhoods. So it was very urban. It was like something that happened in urban areas. And when things were unequal and let's say African Americans were getting some rights, we and other minorities as well, but it was geared a lot towards African Americans in a lot of instances. They created other policies to keep Black people from moving into white neighborhoods, as bluntly as I can say it, right? So they created maps that they then gave to the mortgage companies. And if you were in the red neighborhood, you couldn't get a mortgage in that neighborhood, right? Yeah, and so this kind of policy you can see present in the landscape today. So apparently we haven't beaten this topic to death. Okay, my perspective, note to self. What we're seeing is these neighborhoods are hotter, and we're seeing this across cities. But what I think we need to get to now is not that, you know, there was a policy that was implemented and it was inequitable, and now there's inequities. We need to get to that mitigation point. We need to figure out how to solve the problems, right? And the only thing that's going to help us is empirical analyses and understanding mechanisms. And that takes some very, very key focus. I love that Lorraine is nodding her head. Yes, it just makes my heart full. Thank you. Thank you. Because you just never know, right? Like I just messed that other one up before. Like no one knows what redlining is. Okay, so the urban heat and bus stop design is where we're thinking about the context in Denver. So in Denver, in the US, in Colorado, there is a transportation network that is more often used as a priority for transportation by lower socioeconomic status communities. Yet it's likely because those neighborhoods have less tree cover that their bus stops are really hot and uncomfortable. So how are we going to study that and think about how to redesign and work with people in those landscapes so that they have a better transportation experience? That's only one of the many questions we have, but it's like putting the question into context and coming up with solutions that actually change people's lives in some way. This is where I would like urban ecology to go. I know that everyone might not be on that train, but it's one of my things. And I've been really working hard at this, like, how do we measure structure, ecosystem structure, so we can say something about ecosystem function and then ecosystem services? Because for urban ecologists, most of our understanding of the ecosystem is by computational models like iTree that do nothing but put into effect a little tiny model that Greg McPherson did when he was a PhD student in the 70s. Like there's no data and the model's a big black box, okay? And so every paper that's out there on iTree makes me just, it's a great tool, right? But we need to get beyond it. We need to actually start using data to understand why structure might impact function and how we might change that to produce more ecosystem services. What I love about the city is that we've been noticing here is like, they're all complaining about this. They're like, yeah, so like a tree is worth like $10. That's not what we need right now. All right, I'm getting beyond myself. So here, and the great thing about these kinds of studies on structure and function is they make excellent graduate student projects. Students just love these. They measure the environment, they interact with people, they find out that dogs pee in buckets, and they wonder how they're supposed to separate out pee from rain. It's a really an amazing experience for them. So in my discovery grant, I decided to take a focus on the structure-function relationship and think about urban heat as an example, as one of the things we could be measuring locally. As I've heard that I'm unlikely to get a said discovery grant, but I figured I'd just throw it up here in case maybe some of you have some advice that you can help me get it next time. I don't know. But this is the idea here is that in order for Canadians to benefit, right? Because that's a new thing. So writing a discovery grant was like a mind-blowing experience for me. I mean, I think about programs, but writing a whole grant about a program was a new thing, obviously, for an American. But nonetheless, it was a fun experience. And I think that I really do want to somehow, maybe you can help me figure out how to get work funded here that's very much about these structure function relationships. I want to measure things. I finally get to measure things. I'm finally at a university that has resources and there's a lot of social scientists. And so I can measure things. It's brilliant. It's a dream come true, really. I can work as part of teams in this amazing urban landscape with amazing urban scientists. So the other thing that in terms of relationships and generally relationships, I think Canada has a lot to contribute to our understanding of urban ecosystems and convergence and homogenization. So think about this, redlining was implemented in Canada in the past, but it was really a suburban influence. And it really wasn't about minorities. It was about some other things, is what I'm starting to get by reading the literature. And so imagine that we did some comparative work and thought about how redlining may impact both cities, or just thinking more too about how climate change, is it really true that climate change is going to make Calgary, a semi-arid cold city, a lot more like Fort Collins, Colorado, a semi-arid, much drier and often hotter city? Do we see relationships there? Where do they exist and where do they not? And what can we learn from that? So I'm on to the last. To create sustainable cities, we need research driven by managers, planners, and policymakers.
The camera again.
It's not. I feel just smile and wave. Smile and wave. Yeah. I feel like I'm like an actress. It's not doing. Oh, you're the key. It likes to follow you, not me. Hi. This is really embarrassing. I'll just try to stay right here. Okay. So I've really been lucky to have lots of amazing partnerships with cities. They've trusted me for some God knows reason and share tons of data with me and their ideas. And I just work with that and see what we can do to help them in their decision making. And one of the things that I got to do when I walked back into Fort Collins, Colorado, because I did my PhD there and then went back in later years, I got to jump into the forestry program again and say, what is it that you have that's helping you make decisions and what is it you don't have? And what I noticed is they had a lot of people coming in and consulting companies coming in and marketing something that they wanted the city to buy, which produced a lot of different results, but nothing that was really effective for the city, like lots of eye-tree analyses. And so I went and I said, look, let's just start with a land cover analysis and see if that helps you out. And so we funded this in partnership with the Forest Service, and we put a land cover map in front of them. And all of a sudden, it was amazing because forestry was in some ways considered like the ugly stepsister of the departments in terms of sustainability, because trees aren't native to the semi-arid grasslands that Fort Collins exists. So forestry was kind of like, we'll talk to you when we want to have a good carbon budget, right? We need to plant some trees to reduce our carbon footprint. But other than that, keep your trees out of our way, out of our native landscapes. And so this map and thinking through some different strategies for providing ecosystem services to people brought forestry into the mainline discussions that were happening in terms of managing the city. And it was a brilliant process because then with limited budgets, 5 or so different departments were working together to solve similar problems, rather than just using their budget in one way and all being ineffective. And what we realized when we were there after we started doing this was the city was being harassed by outside sustainability organizations about their urban heat island mitigation plan. And they're like, we don't have a mitigation plan. We don't even know if we should be thinking about the urban heat islands. And so can you help us? Like, what can you do to let us know if we should be thinking about the urban heat island? So we just started creating lots of maps and putting layers together and having a conversation with them. And yes, they realize now that, yes, they should be thinking about urban heat in the context of planning, right? And then the next step is like why and how, right? So we're going to start doing some more mechanistic, mechanistic is a bad word. We're going to do some more studies of mechanism. David Bunnigan is coming through. He's channeling himself. Mechanistic is a bad word, but it is coquitlam. Anyway, so what we're actually looking at here is that how trees and water impacts the urban area, and that's the hottest spots were places in which there were no trees and water, right? And then we were to think about what context that was, especially in this place where the native area is grasslands. All these native areas are actually hot, right? And so what we think about as the urban heat island effect across cities was something that was established in temperate cities, which said that you have a hot city center, the suburbs are cooler, and the surrounding landscape's even cooler. That's not what we see in semi-arid ecosystems. We see the cities hot, this donut of coolness around the suburbs, and then hot again in the natural areas, right? So what does this mean for management? Well, we've got to think through where we put native landscapes and trees, and think about the ecosystem services we want to provide. And then this also related to, they wanted to create policies on water consumption. So they wanted to think about how to influence people's management of their landscapes around their homes and to change water dynamics. Because if you look at this graph, you can see that in the summertime, people double or triple their water use, which you can assume is because they're just watering outside landscapes, right? So it's a huge, huge amount of water. And the city that is struggling to have enough water, we don't seem to have that problem here always in Vancouver. I hear about summertime droughts, but you guys really don't know what this feels like. This feels like we don't get rain and an entire city burns down in the middle of winter, right? Which is what happened in Boulder recently. So all these people are using water. There's lots of urbanization. How do we change that? And you know what's really interesting? So the city gave all this data to us on like individuals' households. I could like spy on my neighbors and see how much water they were using. I didn't do that, of course. But what we were able to see is that smaller properties were using less water. I mean, we're using more water, a lot more water per square foot than these larger properties. What? Well, because if you have a small little plot of land, it's like a postage stamp. It's not that much water to make it green. And also you have a house next to a house next to a house. People start arguing about dandelions and stuff, right? So you have to keep your house, your lawn green to please your neighbors. Also you get into a big argument and they look in your windows and say weird things to you, right? So like all these dynamics come together to make it so the primary mode of development in Fort Collins to save land is to put big houses on small properties, and that is leading to a rise in water use, not a decrease. Ouch. What are we going to do? Probably nothing. But so then we started looking at household energy consumption, which was amazing data set to get my hands on because so Fort Collins has a utility company. And they were like, sure, we'll share our data with you. We'd like to actually see what are the trade-offs between water and household energy consumption. That's a first. Normally, like we're trying to get to Excel Energy or these big companies, and they're like, we're not sharing anything with you people. And so this was really an amazing time where we were able to take people's energy use in homes and ask ourselves whether or not if trees in certain locations around their property and at certain distances really impact energy use. Oh yeah, I'm not really trying to give you, see, you're focusing on the results. I'm focusing on the story. And usually when I'm focused on the results, I'm like, the x-axis is this, and the y-axis is that. Okay, so I mean, this is just like some preliminary data that my student was going over, and it's basically showing you correlation coefficients and which land covers are having a positive or negative influence on energy. Does that make sense? Yeah, it doesn't mean anything to you. And it doesn't mean anything to most people. So that's why in the paper, we had to like frame it into what this actually means is like for every this amount of tree canopy, you would save a light bulb's worth of energy in a year. Okay, so sorry about that. I'll have to, okay. Visuals. Beep. No. So the idea was essentially we were able to look at buffers and azimuths. And so for instance, so the models, look at this thing, it's in the sky now. Did I move too quick? So this, oh my God. Thank you. The models like iTree tell us that you have to plant trees on the west side of homes to actually impact the energy in homes. And we found the opposite. If you plant trees on the east side of homes, you actually have an impact on the energy use. I know, isn't it? Lorian. No, it's so important. There's like a few other things like that in there. We'll talk about it. The paper, it's being resubmitted this week. We've dealt with all the crazy reviews. Okay, so this kind of city-university partnership, I thought it was pretty novel what I was doing, but it turns out that you guys are way ahead of the game and you've got some really cool things happening, right? Like this BUFF program, the people in the audience right now, what Tahia has been doing, Susan Day, just thinking about what the capstone is supposed to be and how Andrew's been leading that and Stephen before that. You've had this as like something on your agenda and you're doing great to achieve these goals. And so I'm like really lucky to like slot in and be like, great, can you guys do that? And I do this one thing. So that's been fabulous. I've also been able to start advising on the McHale program where we're working with the city of Calgary and finding new relationships there. So things like the McHale program will enhance our reach to other cities we might not be actually getting to. And I think that's super cool. I mean, in the beginning of those meetings, the forestry guy was like, we don't really need students to do things. And by the end, just in the like next meeting, after like 5 meetings or so, he said, God, I never thought about all the things students could do for us. And I have money to pay for them. I was like, we're gonna talk, right? So seeds is really also another fabulous thing that I'm starting to understand and learn. It's kind of confusing, but brilliant. Same with City Lab. And so there's lots of frameworks here and I'm excited to slot into those. So, Canada, conclusions. The Global South has a lot to contribute to our understanding of urban ecosystems, so does Canada. Urban ecology is a field based on relationships, and we need more empirical analyses that need to be done in Canada in particular. And sustainable cities, I think Canada is leading the way on that front, and we have so much to show the world, and we have to be more vocal about that in how we put that in the media, but also in our scientific results. And that is it. Yeah. This is us enjoying Vancouver. We moved to a new country during a pandemic and got a puppy because what else do you do? I got a rad bike to get my kid back and forth to school. And we're skiing at Whistler. We've got our paddle boards down at the water at Jericho Beach. We're members. He signed up for sailing classes. Like, I just feel like I'm in. Like, I think I know, but I'd like more advice, obviously. But I think I'm doing all the right things to fit in here. I'm trying.
So that was an amazing talk, and we have time for some questions. I'm talking loud, so your mic picks up here.
Oh, sorry.
And people can put questions in the chat. But before we get to questions, I just want to thank our team and teams that have put together the lecture series. So Ellie Kaliva, Michelle Zeng and her tech crew, our communications folks, Susan, Steph, and their team, and our development group, Michelle, Lindsay's been helping out, and others. So, and our next seminar will be Sarah Benson Amram here in 2 weeks. And so we're going to hear about urban wildlife, which is a great complementation to the excellent talk we heard today from Melissa. So go ahead with your questions. And Melissa, if I could ask you to repeat the question, and I'll go, well, yeah, I can stay here, but if you could repeat the question so
Okay.
people online can hear.
Okay.
Now that you've been in Vancouver for a while,
A while, 4 whole months. Yeah.
and if you're a city, just yourself, what you see with your own eyes, and what you know of the data so far about Vancouver, what do you think, what are specific things that come to you when you're on this?
Well, that presentation was a lot of my ideas. You want me to have more? Yeah, you know, I'm still in the question phase. I really do think that there's something about urban design. There's a strategy we need to come up with how to measure urban design to really show how people thrive in certain places more than others. And I think like a lot of these questions are interdisciplinary and going to take a team. I think that the context, one thing that I didn't mention, what blows my mind is there's no highways through the city. And so even going 11 kilometers could take you half the day, which is brilliant and also frustrating. But then I've also seen, like, I love that I've been dying to be a part of your transportation system, but I see that people don't maybe use it as much. And like, I wonder why. So I don't know, there's still, like I said, there's just like a lot of questions that all come together about urban design, ecosystem function, and human well-being that, and you know, climate change is a big one for me. You know, everyone's been talking about how hot it was in the neighborhoods last summer. And so I'm kind of like from the South and like the global South where it's 40 all the time when we're like in Africa. I'm like, yes, I'm finally going to be able to swim in the water. And everyone's complaining about being inside. Just go to the beach, duh. But I've already, to be honest with you, I've already ordered an air conditioner that slots into this weird fitting open window because I'm afraid that like those things aren't going to be available and we're going to like die inside our home, you know? So these things about what people are experiencing and how we can measure them and make them better, those are really like the basis of my thoughts. Is there questions coming in online that we need to?
So I have a question, which is, so of course with forested landscapes in general, we're very concerned about kind of ecosystem resilience and climate change and a lot of work going into diversity, the effects of the diversity of the landscape on ecosystem processes and ecosystem benefits. So how do you, have you worked on that issue in urban landscapes with some of these questions around heat and water? And
yeah, no, these are really good questions. And so, for instance, in the context of semi-arid cities in Colorado, so what I know well, we talk about how trees aren't usually native to that landscape, but we need trees to cool. And also some of these other things like we need them for, we're noticing in terms of water use. Like, so people water their lawns less when there's trees. So we're seeing these like knockoff effects, but nobody wants to plant these species. And so I tend to ask the question, if we really believe that cities are ecosystems, are there trees that are native to cities? And if so, if there's trees that are native to cities, which ones are going to survive in this particular city over the long term? And I think that's a question we need to ask specifically in Vancouver, because from what I understand, not a lot of your native trees are very happy with what's happening. And we've also seen these weird things though, like in Utah, the tree, you would think that native trees were better for water use, but what they found out was that the non-native trees used less water. because the native trees were a certain kind of tree that normally only grew by water. And so they just use a lot of it. Whereas the non-native trees we were planting really were water saving and able to deal with like heat and different environmental conditions that we needed them to deal with in the urban environment. And so I think we just have to take some of that context and then figure out how we're going to test some of those species. There's this, one of my colleagues at CSU who was with the Forest Service for a while. She works with the Forest Service. Linda Nagel is a part of this major project with forest lands where they're taking species from elsewhere and they think they're going to be the ones that are going to be better in certain forests with climate change. Why don't we should be doing that in the city. We should have some climate change examples. So just some things. Does that answer your question?